Radiation is a form of energy, and this energy can break covalent bonds in DNA, which can produce mutations in the DNA, which, if they occur in genes that control cell division, could lead to uncontrolled cell growth. The secondary function of melanin is to reduce the synthesis of vitamin D in response to UV radiation. This leads to less calcium ion absorption and the maintenance of calcium ion homeostasis within a narrow range. Individuals living in regions exposed to high UV radiation may have developed darker skin to prevent excess vitamin D production, while people in areas of low UV radiation develop lighter skin so they could synthesize enough vitamin D. Skin color depends on the number of melanocytes found in that particular body region. Differences lead to uneven distribution of melanin. Fewer melanocytes are found on the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet, so they have a lighter color. The overall number of melanocytes is identical among all individuals irrespective of skin color, but the spectrum of human skin tones is due to the difference in the amount of tyrosinase activity and the type of melanin that is produced. Common variations of pigmentation include freckles, which are small areas of increased pigmentation resulting from increased melanin production in a local spot. A nevus, which is an area of increased pigmentation due to local proliferation of melanocytes and not an increase in melanin production. An albinism, where the melanocytes fail to make tyrosinase, resulting in a lack of skin pigmentation and increased risk of DNA damage to keratinocytes from UV. Two minor pigments have an effect on skin pigmentation. Carotene is a yellow-orange pigment found in foods such as egg yolks and orange vegetables. It's a lipid-soluble molecule that accumulates in the stratum corneum and imparts a yellow-orange color that is particularly visible in the stratum corneum of thick skin. And it is closely related to vitamin A. Hemoglobin, which is found in red blood cells, is an iron-containing protein that binds to and transports oxygen around the body. Oxygen binds to the iron in hemoglobin in an oxidation reaction, the same reaction that causes iron to rust. The oxidized hemoglobin changes color to a bright orange-red, and this gives blood its characteristic color. Hemoglobin's effect on skin color is an indirect result of blood flow in the dermis. The color of the blood in the deeper dermis is visible through the epidermis. As a result, when we become angry or frustrated, the skin will often take on a pinkish or reddish hue. We can use skin color as a diagnostic tool. Color changes associated with the amount of blood flow in the dermis are useful in diagnosing disease. Erythema is a reddening of the skin that occurs when the blood flow in the dermis increases. The color change is a normal response to exercise where blood flow in the dermis is increased to maximize heat release to the outside environment. Other conditions that cause erythema include trauma, fever, and infection. Pallor occurs when blood flow in the dermis decreases and results in a loss of normal pinkish hue. It's most visible in pale-skinned individuals. The epidermis may take on a white color, which is associated with the collagen in the dermis. This is a normal response when the body's conserving heat in a cold environment, and can also occur when the nervous and endocrine system alter blood flow to the dermis as part of a fight-or-flight response. Cyanosis is a sign that someone needs immediate attention. It occurs when hemoglobin has very low levels of bound oxygen. The blood turns reddish purple and the skin takes on a faint blue hue, and this can occur when somebody has difficulty breathing or the hemoglobin or red cell levels are low in the blood. Okay, so this can be an indication, for instance, of a low hematocrit. The hemoglobin can also be rendered unable to bind to oxygen. This can also produce a cyanotic condition. Let's talk a little bit now about the accessory structures of the skin, the hair, the nails, and the glands. Accessory structures or appendages of the integument include hair, nails, and glands that are derived from epithelial tissue. They assist in the overall function of the integumentary system. Hair is a small filamentous structure that protrudes from the surface of the skin and covers the entire body, with the exception of the lips and portions of the external genitalia and the thick skin on the palms of the hands, the fingers, and the soles of the feet, and the bottoms of the toes and fingers. The hair is too sparse in humans to play a significant role in thermal regulation as it does in other mammals, but it does provide protection by preventing substances and organisms from the external environment from entering the eyes and the nose. On the head, it protects the skin of the scalp from UV radiation and mechanical trauma. Hairs associated with small sensory neurons play a role in detecting changes in the environment. A hair is made of two main parts, a shaft and a root, both made up of stratified squamous keratinized epithelia in various stages of development. The shaft is the portion of the hair that projects from the skin's surface and is made up of columns of dead keratinized epithelial cells that have completed the keratinization process. The root is a segment of the hair that's embedded in the dermis. It's surrounded by a small sensory neuron and is indented at its base by a projection of blood vessels from the dermis called a hair papilla. The root and the hair papilla are collectively known as the hair bulb. Many epithelial cells in the root are alive and have not completed the keratinization process. So this is actually where the hair is manufactured. The matrix is a small number of keratinocytes found at the base of the root that actively divide. The root is embedded in a hair follicle, which is an infolding of the epidermis called the epithelial root sheath that extends deep into the dermis and hypodermis. The epithelial root sheath has an outer component that anchors the follicle to the dermis and an inner component that is anchored tightly to the root. A strand of hair has three visible regions in a transverse section: the inner medulla, which is a soft core only found in thick hair, such as on the head and composed of soft keratin; a middle cortex that is highly structured and organized with several layers of keratinocytes containing hard keratin that provides strength to the hair strand; and the outermost cuticle, which consists of a single layer of overlapping keratinocytes containing hard keratin that provides mechanical strength. Okay, so again, we see the use of these terms over and over again in A&P. Medulla is just a general term meaning the core of anything. Okay, cortex means outer layer. Okay, so here we have a middle and an outer layer. Middle cortex is cellular. The outermost cuticle is also a cortical layer that consists of these dead keratinocytes that provide the mechanical strength. And you can see here in transverse section what this looks like. This is why if we get lucky enough to get a hair sample at a crime scene, we're likely to be able to extract DNA from it and determine whose hair sample that is. Surrounding the epithelial root is a dermal root sheath that's made of connective tissue and supports the follicle and keeps it separate from the dermis. Small bands of smooth muscle called erector pili attach to the dermal root sheath on one end and the dermal papillary layer on the opposite end. Contraction of these tiny muscles causes the hair to stand up, which is a condition known as piloerection, and gives the skin a dimpled appearance that we know as goosebumps. And this is in response to fright or to cold temperatures. Hair growth averages between 1 and 1.5 centimeters monthly and varies between individuals. Growth is not continuous but occurs in a cycle with the following phases. During the growth stage, mitosis occurs in the matrix. The cells divide and push the cells above them further away from the blood supply where they keratinize and die. The stage varies in duration from a month to as long as 6 years, depending on the hair's location. During the resting stage, mitosis of matrix ends as the cells die. The follicle shortens and the hair is pushed towards the surface where it remains dormant for a month or so. It falls out on its own or is pushed out by new hair growth. And this, again, is an indication that hair growth is ongoing. If you're continuing to lose hair, that means that you have active follicles. It's when you stop losing hair that the follicles are beginning to die. Hair color and texture vary with different types of hair. Lanugo is a thin, non-pigmented hair that's found covering nearly the entire body of a fetus. They generally fall out around birth and are replaced with one of two different hair types: terminal hairs, which are thick, coarse, pigmented hairs found surrounding the eyes and the scalp, and vellus hair that's found on the rest of the body, with the exception, of course, of the palms of the hands, the underside of the fingers, the soles of the feet, the underside of the toes, the lips, portions of the genitalia. Okay? Terminal hair replaces much of vellus hair after puberty, and this varies by gender, with more hair replacement occurring in males than females. Hair color is largely determined by melanin made in the matrix by melanocytes that produces a range of colors. Blonde hair has little melanin, black hair has a lot, red hair has a special reddish pigment that contains iron, which is called pheomelanin. The melanocytes produce less melanin as you age, and as a result, the hair eventually turns gray or white. This is also in part due to the accumulation of air bubbles in the shaft. Nails are hard accessory structures that are located at the ends of digits. They're composed of stratified squamous epithelial tissue filled with hard keratin. The nail plate is the most visible component of the nail and sits on top of an underlying epidermal nail bed and is split into the nail body and the root. The nail body is the visible portion of the plate, and the root is the portion of the plate that lies under the skin, where the matrix that contains actively dividing cells continues to produce the nail. Folded regions of the skin surround and reinforce the nail plate. The proximal nail fold, or proximal edge of the overlying nail root. The distal edge of this fold is called the epicondyle or cuticle and consists only of stratum corneum. The medial and lateral nail folds are on the medial and lateral edges of the nail plate, respectively. The distal or free edge of the nail plate is attached to the underlying nail bed by an accumulation of the stratum corneum called the hypoconchium. And so you can see here in superior view and in sagittal view, sagittal section, where these different structures are located. Okay, looking at from the top, you can see the nail body. You can pick up the cuticle here. There's the lateral nail folds here and here. There's the free edge. Okay, and you can see the medial nail folds that are right next to the lateral margin of the nail. Okay, and then down here you can see the portion of the nail plate that's covered by the skin, and that's what we know as the root, and that's where the nail is actively produced. Nail growth occurs at the matrix. Actively dividing cells push neighboring keratinocytes distally. They die once keratinization is completed and have been cut off from blood supply and grow an average of about 0.5 millimeter weekly. Toenails are grown more slowly. Nails don't contain melanocytes. They're mostly translucent, with the exception of a region known as the lunula, a half-moon-shaped region of the proximal nail plate that represents an accumulation of keratin. And you'll see the lunula if you look at your nails. It's going to be just distal to the cuticle, okay, and it's going to be essentially underneath the superficial surface of the nail. The primary function of nails is to protect the underlying tissue from trauma. It can also be used as a tool, enabling more precise gripping of items when we pick them up. The skin has two basic types of glands derived from epithelial cells in the epidermis, but located in the deeper dermis, as I indicated earlier. Sudiferous glands that make sweat, and sebaceous glands that produce only sebum. The sebum is an oily secretion, okay, so it tends to be hydrophobic, and it makes the skin supple, as well as the hair shaft and the rest of the hair follicle. It also contains antimicrobial components, and the sudiferous glands, which are there primarily for fluid balance and thermal regulation. Okay. There's 4 types of sweat glands that differ structurally, and the products that they secrete will vary. All secrete products via exocytosis, and this type of secretion is known as merocrine secretion. Ecrine sweat glands are the most prevalent type. These are simple coiled tubular glands that are found throughout the body. They produce sweat containing mostly water and waste products and electrolytes. They exit from ducts through a sweat pore onto the epidermal surface. Apocrine sweat glands are found in specific regions of the body, such as the axillary, anal area, and the areola. Large glands release a protein-rich secretion from the hair follicle that, upon bacterial action, give the characteristic body odor. Secretions can become odoriferous once they get metabolized by the bacteria that are normally found on the skin. Its production is influenced by hormones. They become active after puberty. Ceruminous glands are modified apocrine glands that release a thick secretion called cerumen, or earwax, into the hair follicles found in the ear. Cerumen traps incoming particles along the tube leading to the tympanic membrane, also provides lubrication, and also keeps insects out of the ear, and also prevents the growth of mold. Okay? And remember, when we talked about apocrine secretion before, this is a type of secretion in which the apical end of the glands that line the duct pinch off and become the secretory product. Mammary glands are highly specialized sweat glands that produce a modified sweat product known as milk, which is designed for the nutrition of the newborn. Sebaceous glands are branched clusters of secretory cells called acini that surround small ducts. They converge to form a central duct that empties into a hair follicle or a small pore and makes and secretes sebum, which is found everywhere on the body except the palms and the soles. The greatest number is found on the face and scalp. Its secretion is influenced by sex hormones, especially the male sex hormone testosterone. Dramatic increase in sebum production occurs after puberty and is an example of the cell-cell communication principle, again, in response to these changes in hormone levels. Sebum is a waxy, oily mixture of lipids released by holocrine secretion. The secretory cells accumulate the sebum until the cell ruptures. They contain cellular fragments and debris in addition to lipid. They coat the hair and provide it with a hydrophobic barrier that inhibits water loss, and it also inhibits the growth of or kills certain bacteria as a result of antimicrobial components contained in the sebum. An infection of the sebaceous gland produces the characteristic acne, and in severe cases can generate something known as a sebaceous cyst. Let's talk a little bit about wound healing in the skin. A wound is common in skin pathology. It's defined as any disruption in the skin's integrity, and it includes lacerations or cuts, burns, and skin cancer. A burn is a wound that's caused by an agent such as heat, cold, electricity, chemicals, and radiation. It can be grouped into 3 classes according to the extent and the depth of tissue damage. First-degree burns are minor wounds that only damage epidermal tissue. The skin develops erythema and some mild pain without any permanent damage. Second-degree burns involve the epidermis and part or all of the dermis and can result in pain, blistering, and sometimes scarring. Third-degree burns, or full-thickness burns, are the most damaging wounds and involve the epidermis, the dermis, and hypodermis, potentially even deeper tissue, such as muscle and bone. They're not generally painful at first because the nerves have also been destroyed. Typically, they result in major tissue damage and significant scarring with loss of hair follicles and diminished or absent keratin production. So paradoxically, one of the most damaging burns is one of the least painful. They often have problems with dehydration due to massive fluid loss from swelling and also great risk of infection. Okay, and again, this is because we've lost that barrier function of the skin as a result of this thermal insult. The rule of nines is a method for estimating how much of the body has been affected by a burn. The body is split into 11 areas representing 9% of the total body area. It's a useful clinical tool for grading the extent of a burn as well as the severity and extent of a burn, and it's used to direct treatment options. And so you can see the different regions of the body, right? You've got 4.5%, which is the front of the head, 4.5% for the back. You've got 18% for the torso, the front of the torso, 18% for the back of the torso, including the gluteal region, okay? 4.5% for the front of the arms, 4.5% for the back of the arms, 9% for the front of each leg, well, we should say the thigh and the leg, okay, and also the dorsum of the foot and the toes, and 9% for the back of the thigh and the leg, as well as the plantar surface of the feet, okay. One of the most common diseases in the world is cancer, and it's caused by mutations in DNA that induce a cell to lose control of its cell cycle. Unchecked cell division eventually leads to the formation of a large population of undifferentiated cells known as a tumor, which can metastasize. The tumor cells are capable of spreading through blood or lymphatic tissue to other tissues and continue to divide. The damage caused by metastatic tumor cells alters the function of the organs they invade. There are 3 cancers that can affect the skin, and they're linked to UV exposure. Other factors that increase the risk for developing cancer include cancer-inducing chemicals, toxins, or agents known as carcinogens, and exposure to different forms of radiation. Basal cell carcinoma is the most common of all cancer types, including skin cancer, and comes from keratinocytes in the stratum basale of the epidermis. Skin that is regularly exposed to UV radiation is at risk for developing these tumors, and they appear as a nodule with a central crater. They rarely metastasize to other tissues, and they can be resolved successfully with surgery. Squamous cell carcinoma is the second most common skin cancer. It affects keratinocytes in the spinosum. Scaly plaques ulcerate and bleed and are usually found on the head and neck. Tumors are more likely to metastasize than basal cell carcinoma. Surgical removal is useful. Malignant melanoma is cancer of the melanocytes. Early detection of melanoma is critical due to its ability to metastasize. Arms of cancerous melanocytes extend down into the dermis and access dermal blood vessels, and this enables cells to spread to other tissues through the blood. This is treated with surgery and radiation and chemo. The prognosis depends on the size of the tumor, the depth to which it extends into the dermis, and whether it has metastasized into other tissues. Malignant melanoma can be distinguished from other skin cancers and normal moles using the ABCDE rule. A stands for an asymmetrical shape where 2 sides don't match. B is irregularity in the borders. C is a variety of colors within the pigmented area. D is a diameter larger than 6 millimeters. And E is an evolving shape and size change. Okay? And so the trick with this, as with any cancer, is early detection. The earlier you pick up these changes, the more likely the treatment is to be effective because you get to it before it gets a chance to metastasize. And this is one of the reasons why you need an annual checkup, but you also need to examine your skin in the mirror on at least a weekly basis, and on those areas that you can't see, you want to have your significant other look in those areas and see if they see anything unusual. And then you want to make contact with your GP or your dermatologist if you suspect that something's wrong. The reason that early detection is critical is because while the numbers of cancer cells are low, the treatments are more likely to be effective. If you hit prior to extensive metastasis, the treatments are more likely to hit every single cell that could become cancerous before it gets a chance to spread. And that goes with not just cancer of the skin, but any other type of cancer as well. The other thing we should point out is that cancers tend to affect tissues that divide rapidly, and the reason for this is that mitosis always represents a possibility for a mistake in the DNA to occur, either as a result of the replication process or exposure to any of these carcinogens that we've discussed. As a result, we rarely see cancers in things like nerve tissue, we should specify neurons. We don't normally see cancer in neurons. We very seldom see cancer in muscle, okay? But other tissues that rapidly divide frequently exhibit cancer. And so the idea behind a lot of these treatments is that we want to attack rapidly dividing tissue. We're not necessarily specific for the cancer. And so people who are on chemo and radiation frequently get very sick before they get better. And the reason for this is that we also target rapidly dividing normal tissue at the same time, with the hope that we get the cancer before the patient ends up getting sick or potentially dying. And this is why people that are undergoing chemo and radiation often show a reduction in crit, a loss in lining of the gut, the loss of hair and nails. The skin gets very pale, and they usually are in a very unhealthy state. They're essentially taking poison in an effort to try and kill the cancer before it spreads. But again, early detection, always the bellwether here. Okay, that takes care of this chapter. I'll see everybody in the next chapter, and I thank you for listening.